The sun hung low over the painted cliffs of the Arizona desert, casting long shadows that danced along the rocky ridges like spirits of the old world. A dry wind swept over the canyons and into the wide plains, where the dust curled behind a single horse galloping fast across the earth. Atop it rode Nayeli, her long black braid whipping behind her, her eyes sharp and alert as she scanned the distant horizon. Her muscles moved with the rhythm of the horse like she was born in its saddle, her bow slung across her back and a quiver of arrows hugging her side. She was a warrior of her people, one of the finest the Apache had seen in a generation, trained since childhood, forged in fire, trusted by the elders, and respected by the braves. Nayeli was not just a fighter, she was a symbol. Her name was spoken with pride and awe, and she carried that pride like armor. The sun's heat pressed down like a weight on her shoulders, but she didn't slow. She was patrolling far beyond the edge of the tribal lands, scouting for signs of movement, for dangers that slithered beneath the guise of wind and silence. There had been rumors, white men, outlaws, riding through Apache territory, stealing horses, taking what wasn't theirs. The elders had sent her alone. She had volunteered, of course. She always did. By mid-afternoon, the desert began to change. The tracks she followed deepened, the wind no longer covering them with sand. Fresh hoofprints, heavy horses, too many to be a traveling merchant, not organized enough to be soldiers. She slowed her mount, dismounted, and pressed her fingers into the tracks. 7. No, 8 men, maybe more. She stood slowly, adjusting the strap of her quiver, her jaw tightening. They were close. The silence of the desert grew sharp, like the moment before a storm. Then a crack. It wasn't thunder. The gunshot came from the ridge to her right. Her horse screamed and bolted, blood streaming from its flank. Nayeli dove behind a rock, heart pounding, arrows already in hand. Another shot rang out, chipping the stone inches from her face. She didn't panic. She didn't breathe. She waited. A shadow moved at the edge of the cliff above. She loosed an arrow, and a scream echoed through the canyon. One down. But there were more. Too many. They were hunting her like coyotes, moving fast, circling, keeping her pinned. She sprinted toward a dry ravine, zigzagging to avoid the hail of bullets that cut the air around her. She made it to cover, crouched behind a boulder, drawing in sharp, burning breaths. That's when she felt it, the heat in her thigh, the wetness. She looked down. Blood. A bullet had torn through the muscle just above the knee. Her leg shook beneath her. She tied a strip of her sash around it, ignoring the pain. Another shot. This one caught her in the other leg, just below the knee. She screamed, and still she crawled. Dirt in her mouth, blood on her hands. She pulled herself through the ravine like a mountain lion with a broken spine, dragging her body with the last of her will. Every inch was agony, but she would not let them have her. They would not take her scalp. They would not take her pride. Then the shooting stopped. Voices echoed through the canyon. Footsteps. The men were coming closer, searching for her. She rolled beneath a patch of dry brush, her body trembling. Her blood pooled into the dirt, staining the rocks dark. She held her breath, eyes fixed on the sky, watching the vultures circle. The men came close. They kicked rocks, muttering curses. "She's dead," one of them said. "No way she crawled out of here. Leave her for the buzzards." Their footsteps retreated. Silence returned. But it was no longer comforting. Nayeli waited until the sun set before moving again. Her legs, useless now, hung behind her like sacks of meat. The blood had stopped, dried and crusted, but the pain hadn't. It was a fire now, burning through bone and nerve. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She crawled. Night fell over the desert like a veil. The stars offered no comfort, only a cold reminder of how far she was from home. Her mouth was dry, her body racked with fever. The dreams came fast and furious. Some memories, some hallucinations. She saw her mother's face, her father's voice singing to the fire, her brothers dancing with war paint on their cheeks, the scent of cedar and horse sweat and fresh kill. She saw fire, smoke, the white men with their guns. She saw her own legs, whole, powerful, running through the hills, and then saw them vanish beneath the dust. She crawled for days. Sometimes she passed out. Other times she stared at the sun until her vision blurred. Her skin peeled, her lips cracked. She whispered to herself. Prayers, curses, songs from childhood. No one came, until she reached the road. It was barely a path, more wagon ruts than anything, leading to the trading post on the edge of the border town. She didn't remember the final hours, just the taste of dirt, the slapping of flies on her face, the sound of boots crunching gravel nearby. When she opened her eyes, it was to faces looking down. Pale faces, eyes wide. God almighty, someone whispered. It's an engine. She's still breathing. Leave her. Probably diseased. Look at her legs. Ain't nothing left. They stood around her like curious children around a dead animal. Some laughed. One man spat near her head. Another took a step back, uncomfortable. Damn shame, he muttered, walking away. No one touched her. No one helped. She had escaped death in the desert, only to be welcomed by rejection. They left her on the edge of the trading post, not far from the trough where the mules drank. The sun was high again. A circle. Unforgiving. She lay there for hours, barely conscious. Flies gathered around her wounds. Her once proud warrior hands now swatted weakly at the air. The cloth around her legs was soaked in dried blood and filth. She didn't pray anymore. She waited. She didn't know how long it had been before she heard the voice. It was gravelly, calm, like the earth had decided to speak. Someone ought to get you in the shade. She opened her eyes. A shadow blocked the sun. The figure was tall, older, weathered face, lines carved deep by time and sun. A wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his eyes, but his voice was steady. Not soft, not cruel, just steady. I ain't here to hurt you, he said, and I sure ain't gonna let you rot out here like a dog. She tried to speak. No sound came. I got a cart, he continued. Might not be the smoothest ride, but it's better than dirt. She shook her head weakly. She didn't want his pity. She didn't want anything. He nodded once, understanding. All right, then. But I'm leaving. A canteen and a cloth. If you change your mind, I'll be back before sundown. And he left. That night, the fever took her again. She thought she saw wolves, her own spirit animal. They were circling, not to devour, but to guide. She reached out, but her fingers grasped nothing but sand. The next morning, the man returned. He didn't speak. He just lifted her into the back of the cart, wrapped her in a blanket, and turned the horse toward the horizon. She didn't fight. She didn't thank him. She simply closed her eyes and let the world sway beneath her. She thought perhaps her tribe had come, that they had tracked her, that they would bring her home. They did come, 3 days later. Eli had placed her in a shed near his ranch, cleaned her wounds, fed her broth. He was away mending a fence when they arrived. 2 warriors and an elder. They didn't step inside. They looked at her from the doorway, their eyes wide and unreadable. Nayeli sat propped up on a bed of hay, her legs wrapped in clean cloth, her hair matted but her eyes burning. You live, the elder said. I do. He looked at her legs, at the emptiness beneath the knees. You cannot hunt, you cannot ride, you cannot fight. I am still Nayeli. He looked away. You are not whole. I am alive. That is not enough. He turned without another word. The warriors followed. No one embraced her. No one knelt. No one wept. They left her again. The second abandonment hurt worse than the first, because this time she was awake. She sat alone for a long time after they vanished into the dust. The wind blew through the cracks of the wooden shed. Outside, a horse neighed. Somewhere, a hammer rang against metal. Life continued. And Nayeli, warrior of the Apache, who had bled for her people, who had faced death with fire in her soul, now sat in silence. But her silence was not defeat. It was waiting. Waiting to rise. The morning came slow, with a pale golden light slipping through the cracks in the wooden shed. It settled gently across Nayeli's face, warming the skin that had been too long burned by the desert and cooled by fever. Her eyes opened without struggle for the first time in days. The pain was still there, dull and deep like it had sunk into her bones, but the fire that kept her alive was no longer flickering. It was starting to rise again. She sat up, propped on her elbows. Her arms ached. Her back was sore. She glanced down at what was left of her legs. The bandages were clean, tightly wrapped. Someone had tended them with care. Beside her sat a small wooden bowl with water, and next to it, half a biscuit, torn unevenly. She touched it, hesitated, then took a bite. The door creaked open. He stepped in like the creak was part of his bones. Slow, deliberate, not wanting to startle her. He wore the same hat, the same duster, the same expression of quiet patience. He nodded once, as if they had spoken 100 times before. "You're awake." She said nothing. "I figure you're going to need a better bed than that hay pile. I got an old cot in the barn I can drag over. You don't like it, you can throw it at me." Still, she didn't answer. He took a step closer, squatting down a few feet from her, not crowding her, just present. The smell of tobacco and sweat clung to him, not unpleasant, just worn, like everything he owned. "My name's Eli Morgan. I own this land. Not much, but enough." She studied his face, searching for the trap, the pity, the charity. But it wasn't there. His eyes didn't dance around nervously. He didn't glance down at her legs or wince when he saw the stumps. He looked her straight in the eyes, like she was still a person, like she wasn't broken. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse but steady. "Nothing." "Then why?" "Because leaving you to rot under the sun didn't sit right with me. That's all." She narrowed her eyes. "You don't know who I am," he shrugged. "Don't have to." "You should." He cracked a slight smile. "Reckon I'll learn if you stick around long enough." She looked away. She hated the kindness in his voice, hated how it made her chest tighten. She'd rather be yelled at, be feared, be dismissed. That, she understood. This gentleness, she didn't know what to do with. He stood, adjusting his hat. "You need anything, you holler. I ain't far." He left her alone again. The days passed like that. Quiet, slow. Eli brought her food, water, books she didn't open, tools she didn't touch. He spoke little but never ignored her, never looked down on her. And that, more than his words, stuck with her. One afternoon, she heard hammering, not the careless kind, rhythmic, intentional. She dragged herself to the shed door, pulling her weight across the floor with her arms. It hurt like hell, but she refused to call for help. Outside, Eli was working beside the barn. He'd set up a crude bench, and on it, a pair of wood frames, shaped like legs. No, not legs. Supports. Like stilts, only shorter. Metal hinges. Straps. Leather padding. He didn't see her watching. She watched anyway. When he came back inside that night, she didn't ask. He didn't explain. He just set the first prototype down beside the cot and said, "Don't have to use it, but if you do, you might fall a few times. Just means you're trying." She stared at the strange contraption. It looked like something a child would build. Rough, unpolished, but possible. That night, she didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of her body pressing down like stone. She hated this weakness, this slowness. But she hated more the way she had become invisible, to her tribe, to strangers, to herself. At dawn, she reached for the rig. It took her 30 minutes to strap it on. Her hands shook. The buckles didn't fit right. The leather scraped her skin raw. But when she pressed her palms to the ground and tried to lift herself up, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Resistance, her body pushing back against the earth. She collapsed, then tried again. Eli appeared at the doorway and watched without speaking. She tried once more, fell again. "Straps need tightening," he said gently. "Want me to fix 'em?" She grunted. "No." He nodded and walked away. She kept trying. By noon, she stood, only for a second. But it was enough. The next day, Eli brought her another pair. Lighter, with better balance. He'd sanded the wood smoother and added padding to the inner sockets. She said nothing, but adjusted the fit in silence. Each day became a war against gravity, against pain, against the part of her that screamed to give up. Her hands blistered from the crutches. Her arms throbbed from lifting her weight. Her back ached. But she stood longer, walked further, spoke more. One morning, Eli handed her a rope. "What is this?" she asked. "Figured you might want to help me lead the cattle. There's a bull needs guiding to the pen. Big, dumb, mean." She eyed him. "You trust me to not let him gore you?" He shrugged. "If he does, I'll die knowing it was my own damn fault." She smirked, just a flicker. They walked together toward the pasture. She leaned on her crutches, legs strapped to their stiff frames, her movements uneven but determined. The bull was indeed large and ugly, and it stared at her with the same look many people did. Uncertain, suspicious, waiting for weakness, she stared back. Then swung the rope forward with a sharp snap. The bull blinked, startled, then began moving. Eli chuckled. "Told ya!" She was too proud to admit it felt good. Over time, Nayeli's presence on the ranch changed from tolerated to accepted. The few hired hands who passed through tipped their hats. They didn't joke, didn't whisper. Maybe they saw the way she moved, like a wounded animal that still had teeth. She started crafting again. Leatherwork, small things. A pouch here, a saddle strap there. Her fingers remembered the skill. She traded a few items in town. People stared, yes, but they also paid. One afternoon, Eli returned from town with a folded piece of paper. A notice. There had been another raid. A group of outlaws had attacked a wagon caravan, left no survivors, took horses, supplies, and vanished. Nayeli's hands froze on the stitching she was working. "Who?" she asked. "Don't know. Some think it's the Briggs gang. Same bastards that hit you." She looked away, her fingers tightened around the awl. "You ever see their faces?" he asked. "I remember one. A red scarf. Scar under his left eye." Eli nodded slowly. "Might be time we start keeping the rifles loaded." She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she walked the ranch alone under the stars, her prosthetic legs creaking with every step. She passed the corral, the chicken coop, the empty bench where Eli sometimes smoked. Her eyes wandered to the hills. She still dreamed of home. Sometimes, she wondered if they thought of her. Sometimes, she hoped they didn't. But fate wasn't finished with her yet. A week later, a girl appeared on the edge of the ranch, young, maybe 13, barefoot, Apache. Nayeli spotted her first from the porch and stepped down slowly. The girl didn't move, just stared. "Your name?" Nayeli called out. "Kaya." Nayeli walked closer. The girl didn't flinch. "Why are you here?" "They told me you died." "I didn't." "I know." Silence stretched between them. "I wanted to see if it was true," Kaya said finally. "What?" "That you still walk. That you still fight, that you're not afraid." Nayeli's voice was soft. "I am afraid every day." "Then why do you stay?" She looked back toward the house. "Because I was seen. Because someone gave me dignity when no one else did. Because here I can rebuild." But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, "Because I am not done yet." Kaya stepped forward. "Will you teach me?" And Nayeli, the broken warrior, the woman left behind, nodded. Yes. The days that followed moved like the slow churn of river water, quiet on the surface, but full of unseen currents beneath. Nayeli woke before the sun now, her body stronger, her mind sharper. Her hands no longer shook when she buckled the straps around her prosthetics, and her steps, though stiff, had become steadier. The ground no longer felt like her enemy. It belonged to her again. Kaya had returned each day since their first meeting. She brought no weapons, no offerings, just questions and eyes that watched everything. She moved like a child trying to pretend she wasn't one. Her hands fidgeted when she wasn't focused. But she listened, intently, hungrily. And Nayeli gave her what she needed. Not stories, but discipline. They started with small tasks. How to track footprints in dry soil. How to listen for the difference between a snake's rattle and the desert wind. How to hold a blade without gripping it too tight. Kaya struggled, stumbled, fell, but always got back up. Nayeli watched her and saw flashes of herself, of the girl she had been before the blood, before the exile. In the quiet hours, Eli worked on the ranch as always. He never interfered, never asked questions about what she taught the girl. But sometimes, he watched from a distance, leaning on a fence post, chewing the end of a wheat stalk. His eyes held no judgment, only something like recognition. He knew what it meant to pass on a skill, to forge something stronger than yourself before you disappeared. One afternoon, while the sky boiled with heat and the cattle huddled under patches of shade, Nayeli set a small wooden bow in Kaya's hands. "You made this?" Kaya asked. "I carved it years ago. Before you lost your legs?" Nayeli nodded. Kaya looked down at it with awe. "Why didn't you throw it away?" "Because it still works." The girl turned the bow in her hands, tracing its edges. Then she raised it, clumsy, and let the arrow fly. It barely traveled 10 feet before bouncing in the dust. She cursed under her breath. "You're not weak because you missed," Nayeli said calmly. "You're weak if you stop trying." Kaya nodded and went to retrieve the arrow. By the end of the day, her arms were shaking from exhaustion, and her tunic clung to her with sweat. Still, she smiled when she hit the target once. Just once, and Nayeli said nothing but gave the faintest of nods. That night, as the sky turned orange behind the hills, Eli brought out a jug of water and sat beside Nayeli on the porch. "She's a fast learner," he said. "She wants to survive. She has you. She doesn't have her people." He looked at her, thoughtful. "Neither did you, but you're still here." She glanced at him, brow raised. "And what's your excuse?" He chuckled. "Stubbornness or loneliness. Hard to tell the difference after a while." She looked away, watching Kaya by the corral feeding the horse she'd taken a liking to, a lanky brown gelding with a white blaze and lazy eyes. "They're going to come," Nayeli said softly. Eli didn't ask who. He already knew. "I've been patching the fences," he replied. "Sharpened the axes, loaded the rifles." "You think that's enough?" He shrugged. "It's all I know." She was quiet for a moment. "They're not just thieves," she said. "They're killers." "I know. Then why aren't you afraid?" "Because I've lived long enough to know that if you spend every day waiting to die, you stop living." She didn't speak again. The wind picked up, brushing strands of hair across her face. Somewhere, a coyote yipped in the distance, then fell silent. The next day, word came from town. Eli returned from the trading post with a heavy brow and dust on his coat. He handed Nayeli a folded paper. She opened it with careful fingers. It was a notice from the sheriff. Another ranch hit, a family slaughtered, supplies stolen, livestock driven off, no survivors. A red scarf was found on the scene. Nayeli's fingers clenched around the paper. She said nothing. Later that night, she went to the barn and pulled open the chest she had once refused to touch. Inside were her old weapons, cleaned and sharpened. Her bow, her quiver, a small blade carved from obsidian. She ran her fingers across them like they were old friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Kaya watched her from the doorway. "Will you fight again?" the girl asked. "I never stopped." Kaya stepped inside, eyes on the bow. "Can I help?" Nayeli handed her a rag and pointed to the leather armor laid out beside the chest. "Then, start cleaning." The next 3 days passed in preparation. The ranch transformed. Not into a fortress, Eli didn't have the men or the time, but into something hardened. Traps were laid in the grass. Rifles were placed within reach. The barn door was reinforced. The fences, once meant to keep cattle in, were now laced with wire to keep danger out. Kaya trained harder, faster. She no longer fumbled with her arrows. Her balance improved. She could climb the hayloft ladder without pause. Eli kept quiet through it all. But on the fourth day, just before dawn, Nayeli heard a horse galloping in the distance. She stepped outside, scanning the horizon. A lone rider came into view, bloodied, slumped, barely holding on to his mount. Eli rushed out and caught the reins as the man fell. "Help, please," the man gasped. Eli and Nayeli pulled him down. His shirt was soaked red. He bore a brand on his shoulder. One of the neighboring ranches. "They're coming. Took everything. Headed this way. Told him you helped a squaw. Said they'd burn you for it." His eyes rolled back. His breath stopped. Nayeli stood, her jaw clenched. "They'll be here before nightfall," she said. Eli nodded. "Then we stand." She turned toward the shed where Kaya slept. "No," Eli said. "She's a child. She's stronger than she looks. So are you, but I won't bury her." Nayeli stared at him, then nodded. When Kaya woke, Nayeli handed her a small pouch. "Go east. Stay hidden. Wait for 3 days. If you don't hear anything, find a horse and ride to the Chiricahua camp. Tell them who you are." Kaya shook her head. "No, I'm not leaving." "You are," Nayeli said. "Because if I fall, someone needs to remember." Tears filled the girl's eyes. "But I'm not ready." Neither was I. Nayeli pulled her into a hug, a short, strong embrace, then turned away. By mid-afternoon, the dust cloud appeared on the western ridge. 6 riders. Red scarves. Nayeli stood on the porch, her bow in hand, prosthetic legs locked in place. Eli stood beside her, shotgun cradled against his chest. They waited. The riders approached with slow confidence, like wolves circling prey. Their leader, tall, wiry, scar under his left eye, dismounted and stepped forward. "Well, well," he said, grinning. "The half-breed freak survived." Nayeli didn't flinch. He looked at Eli. "Didn't think you'd stoop so low, old man." Eli spat. "Didn't think you'd still be ugly." The outlaw laughed. "We're taking the stock, the tools, and the woman." Eli raised his shotgun. "Try it." The first shot came from the roof of the barn. A trap Nayeli had set, an old rifle mounted and aimed. The bullet hit one of the riders clean in the chest. Chaos exploded. Eli fired. Nayeli loosed arrows with terrifying speed. The gang scattered, returning fire. Bullets tore through the fence posts. One smashed the porch railing. Nayeli dropped behind a barrel, fired again, hit a rider in the thigh. He screamed, fell. Eli took a slug to the shoulder and fell back. She crawled to him, dragging him inside. "You're bleeding," he grimaced. "Better than the alternative." Outside, hooves pounded. Someone was setting fire to the barn. Nayeli rose, blood on her arms, eyes blazing. She stepped into the yard. The leader turned. "You think you can stop us? With sticks for legs?" She fired. Arrow. Chest. He stumbled. "Another!" "Throat!" He dropped. The last rider fled, horse hooves disappearing into the hills. Nayeli stood alone. The flames lit the sky behind her. Smoke curled around her silhouette. She didn't collapse. She didn't cry. She just stood, the wind tugging at her braids, the fire reflecting in her eyes. Behind her, Kaya stepped from the trees. "I couldn't leave." Nayeli turned, expression unreadable. "You'll learn." Kaya walked to her side, and together they watched the barn burn. The fire crackled into the early hours of morning, long after the last outlaw had fled and the last echo of gunfire had died into the hills. Flames danced along the blackened bones of the barn, casting tall, flickering shadows against the ranch house walls. The smoke spiraled into the night like a signal to the heavens, or perhaps a warning to any others who might think of riding in with blood on their hands. Eli lay inside, his arm bound tight with cloth and leather. chest rising and falling in short, shallow breaths. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, missing the bone by an inch but carving a path of agony that left him too weak to sit upright. Nayeli had stitched the wound herself, her fingers steady even as her body trembled from exhaustion. She hadn't slept. Neither had Kaya. The girl sat near the window, one hand on a rifle across her lap, eyes locked on the tree line. There was no telling if more men would come. Nayeli hadn't said a word about what they would do next. She only sat beside Eli, wiping the sweat from his brow, watching his color return little by little. By dawn, the fire had burned itself out. The barn was gone. Only the smoldering remnants remained. Charred timber, warped iron, the scorched remains of tools. The horses had broken free during the chaos. Most of the cattle were scattered, but alive. Kaya stepped outside and stood at the edge of the destruction, her hair damp with sweat, her face streaked with soot. She turned when she heard the sound of footsteps, slow, uneven. Nayeli approached, her shoulders squared, her frame silhouetted by the rising sun. Her prosthetic legs clanked faintly with each step, the leather straps darkened with blood and dirt. She carried her bow in one hand, an axe in the other. "We'll rebuild," she said. Kaya nodded but said nothing. Nayeli looked past her toward the eastern hills. "They came for me," she said after a long silence. "They'll keep coming." "Let them," Kaya whispered. Nayeli turned toward her. "I don't run. Not anymore." "You never did." A few hours later, Eli managed to sit upright with help. His face was pale, but his eyes were alert. "You look like hell," he muttered. "You should see the other guy," Nayeli said. Eli smiled faintly. "Didn't think I'd live long enough to be carried by a woman with wooden legs. You didn't think you'd live long enough to need help from anyone." "You're not wrong." Nayeli helped him outside, one arm around her shoulder, where he sat on a stump beside the ashes of the barn. The smoke was still warm. His eyes scanned the ruins, but he didn't weep. "We can build another," he said. "I know. We've got lumber stacked out by the creek, nails in the tool shed. I can give orders with one arm. You're good at giving orders. I was married, remember? I learned early." She let out a small laugh. That evening, Kaya brought in the horses. Two of the mares and the gelding she'd befriended. They were nervous, skittish, but they came when she whistled. She tied them near the trough and brushed them down with soft strokes. "Smart girl," Eli said as he watched from the porch. "She's got hands like her mother." Nayeli looked over sharply. "You knew her?" He nodded. Kaya's mother was a healer. Came to town once with an elder. Helped during a fever outbreak. She saved my wife once, years ago." Nayeli didn't answer. "She's got her fire," Eli added. "And your discipline. I'm not her mother. No, but you might be the reason she survives what comes next." The days stretched thin after that. Rebuilding wasn't easy. Every morning began with checking the traps for fresh meat, then repairs, fences, roofs, water lines. Kaya learned to split logs. Nayeli crafted new saddle straps, cleaned weapons, kept the livestock from wandering too far. Eli, stubborn as ever, worked with one good hand. He taught Kaya how to mend a wagon wheel, how to read the skies for rain, how to gut a rabbit cleanly. His body might have been weakened, but his will wasn't. Nayeli rarely spoke about the men who had come. She said even less about the one who had died at her feet. But the image lingered, the arrow that pierced his throat, the way his hand had clutched his neck, eyes wide with disbelief, as if he had never imagined death would take him from someone like her. There was a shift in town. Word had spread about what had happened at the Morgan Ranch, about the woman with no legs who stood and fought like she had 10, about how 6 men rode in and only 1 rode out. At first, people kept their distance, as they always had. But then one man came, then another. By the end of the week, 3 neighbors, ranchers from the valley, arrived with supplies, spare lumber, nails, a hammer, a small bag of flour. "We heard you could use a hand," one said. Nayeli didn't trust them at first, but Eli nodded, and she stepped aside. The barn rose slowly over the next 2 weeks. It was smaller than the first, but stronger, the beams reinforced with care. They built a lookout above the roof, and Eli mounted a rifle there with a crank to rotate it. He called it insurance. Kaya trained every day. Her arrows found the target more often now. Her form was cleaner, her breathing steady. Nayeli pushed her harder than ever. Made her run, made her fall, made her get back up. "You're too soft," she said one day. "I'm trying." Trying isn't enough. Kaya's face turned red with frustration. "You want me to be like you." Nayeli knelt in front of her. "No," she said. "I want you to be better." Kaya's lips trembled, but she nodded. One night, while the crickets sang and the moon cast long shadows, Eli sat on the porch with a blanket draped over his shoulders. Nayeli sat beside him, oiling her bow. "You ever think about going back?" he asked. "To the tribe?" He nodded. She was quiet for a long time. "They buried me," she said. "Twice. Once in the desert. Then again in their hearts. They might have heard what you did here, might have changed their minds. Maybe, but I haven't changed mine." He nodded again, didn't press. "I'm not the same woman they remember," she said. "And I'm not the woman they feared either. I've become something else, something in between. That's not a bad thing. No. It just means I have to build my own place now." He looked at her, a flicker of admiration behind the tired eyes. "You already have." The next morning, a rider approached the ranch. Not fast. Not dangerous. Alone. Nayeli stepped out, hand on her bow. The rider dismounted, a young man. Apache. "I bring word," he said. "From who?" "Your tribe." She didn't move. "They wish to speak, to offer recognition." "Recognition?" she echoed. "For your bravery, for your survival, for the girl you protect." Nayeli studied him. "They cast me out. They regret it. I don't care. They want to see you." "I'm not interested." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll tell them you live, and that you don't need their forgiveness." She turned away. "Do that." He mounted his horse and rode off. Eli stepped onto the porch, rubbing his shoulder. "Don't want to see them?" "No. Not even for closure? I already got that. When I didn't die." She walked back into the barn, where Kaya was waiting with 2 bows in her hand. "Let's train." The wind was changing. Nayeli felt it in the bones beneath her skin, in the air that carried less of summer's heat and more of something quieter, heavier. Autumn was coming. The sky had begun its slow shift toward winter, and with it came the scent of dry leaves, distant rain, and something else. Something unfamiliar. The ranch had settled into a new rhythm. Each morning began before the sun cracked the edge of the sky, and each night ended in silence. The barn stood taller now. New wood, reinforced beams, a fresh coat of paint that Eli had insisted on, even if he couldn't lift the brush for more than a few minutes at a time. "You build a place right, it should look like it matters," he'd said. Nayeli had let him paint the first wall himself, even if it took the entire afternoon. She hadn't said it out loud, but she agreed. What they'd built wasn't just shelter. It was memory. It was resistance. It was home. Kaya had changed too. She no longer waited to be told what to do. She rose before Nayeli, checked the perimeter, inspected the traps, cleaned the rifles. Her aim was sharper, her footwork smoother, her voice steadier when she spoke. But she was still a girl. One who'd seen more than she should have, and who wore that weight with quiet pride. Sometimes, Nayeli caught her standing alone in the pasture, staring toward the hills with an expression that spoke of things unspoken. Dreams, regret, hope. She didn't interrupt. Some silences were sacred, but the peace, as always, was temporary. It started with a sound, not loud, just a whisper at first. the creak of saddle leather far off, the sound of hooves brushing dirt. Too smooth to be random, too slow to be safe. Nayeli stood on the porch, eyes narrowed against the setting sun. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her bow leaned against the wall beside her, always within reach. Eli stepped out behind her. "You hear it too," he said. She nodded once. They waited. The rider didn't appear until twilight, when the orange faded into deep blue and the land cast long, uncertain shadows. One horse. One man. No weapons drawn, no hurry in his pace. He stopped at the edge of the fence and raised a hand. "Permission to come close?" he called. Nayeli didn't answer. Instead, she stepped off the porch and walked toward him. Up close, he was younger than she expected. Mid-20s, maybe. Dust-covered, a long scar running from his cheekbone to the line of his jaw. He wore no red scarf, but his belt carried the weight of someone used to danger. "My name's Boone," he said. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Nayeli stared at him, unmoving. "I used to ride with Briggs." Still, she said nothing. "I left before the raid, before what they did here. I heard about it in Prescott. Heard what you did." Nayeli folded her arms. "You want forgiveness?" she asked. "No," he replied. "I want to help." "Why?" He looked past her, toward the barn, the horses, the fences rebuilt with care. "Because I know what happens when men like Briggs lose power. They regroup, meaner, angrier, and they're coming." "How do you know?" "Because I've seen them. South of the border. They've taken on mercenaries now, not just outlaws, killers. And they remember who stood against them." Nayeli's jaw tightened. "They want revenge." Boone nodded. "They won't come in sixes this time, they'll come in dozens." Eli stepped forward. "Why warn us?" "Because I owe someone better than me at least one good deed." Nayeli looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked away. "You can stay the night," she said. "Then you ride at sunrise." Boone didn't argue. That night she didn't sleep. Neither did Kaya. They sat near the fire in the main room, rifles laid out before them, checking powder, oiling parts, counting ammunition. They didn't talk. There was nothing left to say. The next fight wouldn't be like the last. This one would be war. Boone left the next morning as promised, leaving behind a rough map, scratched into wood with a piece of charcoal. "This is where they're camped," he said. "And this is where they'll cross." Eli watched him ride out and whispered, "That boy's trying to die for someone else's sins." Nayeli said nothing. The week that followed was a blur of movement. The nearby ranchers returned, this time not with supplies but with guns. Word had spread too far to ignore. The woman with no legs who killed a gang with a bow. The ranch that rose from fire. Men and women came not out of charity but out of awe, and maybe out of fear that what had happened once might happen again. Only worse. They dug trenches, built barricades, nailed boards to windows. They taught Kaya how to fire from cover, how to signal with mirrors, how to kill if she had to. She asked Nayeli one night, "What happens if we lose?" Nayeli answered with a calm, steady voice, "Then they'll know we didn't run." And Kaya nodded. The morning of the attack came with silence. No birds, no breeze, no movement. Then came the sound of boots, marching. Then came the dust. 30 men, some on horses, some with rifles, others carrying torches. They didn't shout. They didn't threaten. They simply came. At the center road, a man Nayeli recognized even from a distance. Briggs, brother, taller, meaner, with eyes that looked at her like she was already dead. They stopped 100 yards from the ranch. He raised his hand. "I don't care about your land," he called out. "I don't care about your cattle. I just want the squaw who killed my brother." Nayeli stepped out from behind the barricade. Her voice rang clear. "Then come take me." Gunfire. It began with a single shot, then exploded into chaos. Bullets screamed through the air. Wood splintered. Smoke rose. Horses screamed. Nayeli fired arrow after arrow, her body moving with instinct, not pain. She ducked, rolled, reloaded, rose again. Kaya fought beside her, her face streaked with ash, eyes blazing. Eli covered their flank, his shotgun roaring like thunder. Men fell, some ran, but the others came harder. They broke through the gate, reached the porch, hand to hand. Nayeli drew her blade. She moved like a storm, not fast, but deliberate. Each strike ended a life. Each breath carried the weight of survival. Briggs' brother found her at last. They clashed in the yard, blood mixing with dust. "You're not a warrior," he spat. "You're a freak." She stabbed him through the chest without a word. When it ended, 10 men lay dead. 5 captured. The rest had fled. The sun rose. The ranch still stood. Nayeli dropped to her knees, blood dripping from her blade, and stared at the bodies in silence. Kaya touched her shoulder. "It's over." But Nayeli shook her head. "No, now it begins." In a world that tried to break her, Nayeli stood taller than ever, on legs of iron, with a heart forged from pain and purpose. She was no longer just a warrior of her people, or a survivor of betrayal. She had become a legend of her own making. And though blood had stained her path, it was courage, not vengeance, that lit the way forward. If this story moved you, inspired you, or left you wanting more, don't forget to subscribe to the Wild West Love Chronicles channel. Join us for more powerful tales of resilience, redemption, and untamed love in the heart of the Wild West. There are many more stories waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss a single one.